My name is Joe Prim, and I am the host of Prepare.Defend.Lead. In this episode, we are going to go deep, neck deep into my thoughts on preparedness. If that sounds interesting to you, stick around and I'll catch you on the other side of the intro.
The comfort and distractions of today collide to indulge our desires and provide a slow death by apathy. A superior primitive ethos exists. Prepare for tomorrow. Defend what you value and lead those you love. This mindset is the foundation of living an authentic life as a bold, disciplined man resolute in your mission. Prepare, defend, lead. Your mission. Own it.
All right, here we go with another episode of PDL. Welcome. I hope that you are ready for the ride. What a crazy time down here in Texas as we exit the deep winter apocalypse that was upon us last week and enter into the beautiful springtime weather that is our normal pace down here in February. For most of us, snowpocalypse is nothing but a distant memory. Most of the water boiling orders are coming to an end. The roads have been thawed out for days now. My children are in flip-flops and shorts once again. And if you want to have a better idea of how we survived and how we made it through the snowpocalypse, you can check out the last episode of PDL. But in this episode, I really want to break down preparedness in a way that I never have before on PDL or on Ever Vigilant. I want to break it down and go really deep into what I believe and why I believe preparedness is so important. So again, crazy times. I should have recorded this podcast last night. Monday nights are my night to record PDL now that I've shifted the time to a Wednesday release. I was still writing up notes and still trying to get my thoughts together, so I put it off for today. Of course, today you're running around, get home, not too late, but get home. I ran some OBD diagnostics on the Montero because a check engine light had popped up, probably had just been reset by the dealer before they sold it to me. It appears that it's probably just a misfire because we need new spark plugs and cables. So that was on the list of to-do things anyway, so that was kind of good news. I'm not too worried about that. And then I had the opportunity to jump into a free leadership webinar with a guy named Scott Mann, who was a Green Beret, served in the Special Forces over in Afghanistan, I believe. And he has an organization called Rooftop Leaders. And I was able to jump into just a free webinar, and man, he laid down some great stuff. So I didn't even get to eat dinner with my family. They're on the East Coast, so that kind of put this webinar right in the middle of dinner. But I'm so glad that I participated. Man, if you guys, we live in this day and age where we are surrounded by an amazing amount of information and knowledge. For so many years, I cut myself short of listening to things and from learning from people because in my mind, I was, well, they're just going to try to sell me something. And that may often be the case on these webinars, but it does not mean that there is not a tremendous amount of information that you can gather from somebody in a free webinar. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. He had some great points, especially right now he's talking a lot about leading during crisis time and really got deep into what's going on with COVID. And, he mentioned, it really doesn't matter whether you believe in COVID one way or the other. We cannot deny the fact of the fear and the people being away from family and loved ones, and the fact that so many people are not being socialized the same way that they're used to, of going to the office each day, so many more remote meetings, and the lack of human contact and stuff, and the effect that that is starting to have on our society. And some of that stuff is starting to be written about and starting to be understood by scientists and people who study social behaviors in us humans. But I think that there's so much of that stuff that is going to take many, many years for us to fully understand. So the more fully that we can be available and involved in things, especially with our family. For me, and we'll get later on, like I said, I really want to go deep into some episodes about preparedness and what preparedness is for me and why it is one of the 3 pillars there with Prepare, Defend, Lead. Why it is so detrimental that we understand what it means to prepare. But equally so, as I've said many, many times on Ever Vigilant and other people's podcasts and here on PDL, so often we forget how important leading our family is. We lead at work, we lead in this group, we lead over here, we lead this thing, but we forget how important it is that we see our family as part of our team, and we look at them and take on our role as a leader of our family. Often, in my opinion, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, the home is the hardest place to lead. Again, I will repeat that. In your home, leading your wife and your children is the hardest place to lead. Their paycheck is not reliant on them listening to you. A plaque on your door or the location of your office or the title before your name on your business card means absolutely nothing to them. You get a certain amount of respect just because of your rank or your title or your salary in the work world. That's not the case in your home. So we'll get into that at a later date. Just wanted to touch base on that because you can follow Scott Mann and the Rooftop Leaders there on Instagram. And I'm sure he'll be doing another one of those short webinars as kind of an advertisement for a bigger course that he's got coming up on crisis leadership. And no, I'm not getting any kickback or any sort of money for sharing this. But as long as I'm sharing a couple of cool things that I've been seeing lately, a frequent guest on Ever Vigilant, the last podcast that I had, was Mark Bohr, who runs a firearms and security company called Preparedness. He recently started a podcast called Pearl Snap Tactical, and he's only had a couple episodes out. He sent me a text message and said, "Hey, check this out. I started a podcast." I didn't even get back to him right away, to be honest with you. I wanted to subscribe. I wanted to listen to a few episodes before I got back to him. That way I could give him some honest feedback. The reality is, I'll be honest with you guys, feedback is so important when you are trying to start something new or do something different. You need honest feedback from people that will square with you. But I'll tell you what, I listened to a couple episodes of that podcast, and it is dynamite. I definitely would recommend that you go subscribe and leave him a review, but check out his podcast, Pearl Snap Tactical. Mark is very knowledgeable in all things defense, firearm, security, very knowledgeable in this area, but where Mark does such a great job is that not only is he knowledgeable in that stuff, he comes across in a way where he is very easy for a civilian to understand what he's talking about. He breaks things down into very small, bite-sized pieces so that anybody can understand what he's talking about and can walk away from that episode having learned a lesson. The first couple episodes he did were on ambush, and avoiding ambushes and what to do in an ambush situation, as fathers, as leaders, as business owners, as people that, as church leaders, wherever you're at, these are things that we should be thinking about. Again, I just hit on leadership. Now I'm talking again about defend. I'm hitting on these 3 pillars of PDL, and that wasn't even intentional. But these 3 pillars of PDL are such a huge part of my life that they aren't just something that's written on a t-shirt. They aren't just the name of a podcast. These 3 pillars really have become a way of life. And more than a way of life, as anything that's important to you, they really should become the lens that you look through your life through. So again, check out Pearl Snap Tactical. If you're interested in learning about leadership and learning about leading through crisis, you could check out Scott Mann. Again, not getting anything from either of those guys other than they're both people that just within the last couple weeks I have listened to or taken in free content, free knowledge that they have spent years acquiring. Years, blood, sweat, tears, gaining that knowledge, and they are freely sharing it with us. So out of respect for them and out of respect for what they're doing, I took it upon myself to share. So with that out of the way, again, none of that expected. Just wanted to share it with you guys, some of my life and what I'm doing and where I'm learning things from. Sorry, little sip of some late night coffee so that I can keep the momentum going. But as we get into this preparedness and this mindset and this idea that these 3 things, prepare, defend, lead, are really at the heart of what are our main responsibilities as men, and have been the main responsibilities of us and our forefathers for thousands of years. Since the beginning of creation, these were our responsibilities. And one of our major responsibilities was to prepare. So there are a lot of people out there in the preparedness niche that are going to talk fear and going to try to push you into doing things out of a fear. And when I got into preparedness, that was probably a big motivator for me. And I don't necessarily talk about them as being bad for doing that, because I think that we sometimes need a little bit of fear to motivate us to move forward with something. And that, for me, was the case. But the reality is what I have learned through the years of preparedness, and there's no way I can squeeze all that I want to talk about into one episode. So this is going to get broke down into more than one episode. But for me, preparedness has just grown. The idea of preparedness has grown. But with that growth of what preparedness is, my assurance has alleviated many, many fears and has given comfort and security and trust to me from my family, which has helped quell many of their fears. Because even like we were talking about, or I was just talking about that leadership, there's a lot of fear going on out there in families. There's a lot of people that are unsure if they are going to have a job. There were a lot of people unsure last week about staying warm. There were people unsure in Texas about getting food. There were people unsure about getting water. There were people, and whether it was in Texas last week, and it could be hurricane season in Florida, and when it's hurricane season, whenever that is, right? Or it could be in South Texas, right? When it's hurricane season. Or it could be in the Midwest when it's tornado season. Or on the West Coast when there's an earthquake. We need to be prepared. And the reality is, the more that we go over these ideas, the more that we have plans and we have contingencies and we have equipment and we have skills and knowledge, the less worried that we need to be about things. The less that fear interferes with what we have going on. So as you move forward in preparedness, maybe fear is what gives you the kick in the butt that you need to get started. But after a very short amount of time, what you need to have happen is that fear subside and you start to make good choices. So with all that out of the way, let me actually finally get to my notes. So when I'm talking about preparedness in Prepare.Defend.Lead, is it says in the intro, it says we prepare for tomorrow. Now, a lot of people in the preparedness niche, a lot of people in that, you know, on the crazy reality TV shows that were all about preparedness and stuff, they were only about preparing for an apocalypse, right? Or preparing for the worst case scenario. And through my reading and through my studies and through what I have attempted to do and with the homestead and becoming more self-sufficient and things like that, I really came to the realization that I don't believe that you could really be 100% prepared for that. There's so many different things that are going on that are bigger than just having the equipment or having the books or even having the knowledge or having the food. Really what preparedness comes down to, and this is whether you're preparing for tornado season or whether you're preparing for winter or whether you're preparing for a meeting or a speech or preparing to go on vacation, or preparing for an important test, it's a mindset. When I say prepare for tomorrow, it could just as easily be preparing for that business trip, making sure that you have your suitcase packed, making sure that you got your passport set aside, making sure that you have the comfy pants that you want to wear on the airplane, whatever it might be, right? Whatever's your jam, making sure that you have enough podcasts downloaded onto your phone for the flight, right? Those are preparing. And when I'm talking about prepare, defend, lead in the big sense, that's where we're going. We're preparing for tomorrow, because the more prepared we are, the less fear we have, and the better that we can be. What I find very interesting is that no matter how many podcasts I listen to about public speaking, or how many different books I read or audiobooks I listen to that talk about negotiating, or any time where there's a verbal exchange, where there's communication between you and somebody else, one thing that they're always going to tell you, no matter how proficient they are at giving speeches or at negotiating or at speaking with people, is to practice. To know what you're going to say and practice it. And even practice it with other people, if it might be a job interview or a speech. To go ahead and practice it with other people that can critique you. Now, if the top people of the top people are not afraid to prepare for something that they've done hundreds, if not thousands of times, then me and you should be the first people to get in line to prepare for anything and everything that we try to do. So preparedness is really a mindset of trying to think ahead, of searching out and seeking problems that there is a possibility that they may occur, that they may interrupt your normal life, that if your life is interrupted by something that's a different change of pace, a vacation, something that's out of routine, right? The vacation, a business trip, a test, whatever it might be, something that's out of the ordinary, that you do your best to set yourself in a position to succeed. And that is a mindset. You know that you are out of your routine. You know that you're doing something that's different than normal. And because of that, you are going to prepare. And when you look at preparedness for emergencies or preparedness for an apocalypse, right, you need to look at it in that same light. It can't be fear-based, because then you go and purchase stupid things or make mistakes or set up your preps in a way that may be perfect for the guy on YouTube or may be perfect for your brother-in-law, but might not be the best way to help you in your family, in your situation where you are at today. So when we get to the point where we realize that preparedness is not just going on Amazon and buying these 25 things on this list, or going to the grocery store and buying these 13 things on the list. Lists are great. And I'll be honest with you guys, if some of you guys, it would help you out to have some lists of where to begin or how to get started in preparing for emergencies, direct message me on Instagram or on Facebook or email me. And if that would be helpful to you, I'll do a podcast on it. I'll send you out a list and I'll do a podcast on it. Sometimes for me, what I have a difficulty doing is knowing if I'm going deep enough into a subject for those that listen to this podcast, or if I'm going too deep into a subject, because this is something that those that listen to this podcast are already well versed in. So if you have questions, if you need some help or some direction, hey, I got no problem helping you out or putting you on to somebody that will be able to help you out in that area. But what I want us to all see and to look at things in a different light, from being this idea of just purchasing things or just stocking up on things, to an idea of preparing. Just as you would for a test, where maybe you're writing out your index cards to study, to practice, to test yourself, or whether it be writing up notes for a meeting that you have coming up, or writing up your notes and practicing for a speech that you have, or jotting down notes for me before I start recording a podcast. It's really a mindset shift. It's a way of living your life, that rather than just step out that door each morning, right? Completely let things take you by surprise. Rather than that, to look ahead, to do your best, your due diligence, to set yourself up in a position to thrive rather than just survive. So, in this episode, we're really going to talk a lot about the mindset. I want to go deep into the mindset part on these things, because I think that so often this is the part that's overlooked. So let's get into why we would prepare. Why we would prepare for an emergency. I find it so interesting that people would never question why you would prepare for taking an important test, your ACT or your SAT test, or maybe you're going into a certain trade or a certain business where you need to get your license, get licensed for something, of course you're going to study. Of course you're going to look into any way that you can. You're going to watch YouTube videos. You're going to talk to people maybe in that business. You're going to do whatever you can to try to give yourself that edge so that you can get that grade that you need to get on that test. And everybody would be expected to do the same, right? So if we got a test, or when we're going on vacation, right? We're going camping. We got our list out of what we're going to do to prepare to go on that camping trip, right? We're checking the air pressure and checking the oil in our vehicles, and maybe checking once and twice to make sure that we have dog food with, and making sure that we have enough water and snacks and all these different things, right? Because we are preparing. But yet each year in Florida, when their hurricanes come through and it's hurricane season, people don't have water. And rather than question why in the world nobody has water when hurricanes or the possibility of hurricanes is during a certain time period every single year, people have a dire emergency and don't have the water or the food they need to eat. So what I'm asking you is to look at things in that light. Now, a case of water during the summer down here in Texas is probably less than $4 for quality H2O, as Waterboy would say, in a bottle, all sealed up, packaged up, easy to move around, easy to store in your garage, easy to store in your basement, easy to travel with, all packaged up in space-age plastic, right? So what if you bought one extra case of water each month? That would put you at 12 extra cases of water in that 1 year. Now, what if you went even further and bought 2 a month? Where does that put you? That simple thing of buying an extra case or 2 of water each month puts you in a position to know that you should have enough water for your family, should there be an emergency of a week or even a little bit longer. But it also puts you in a position to be able to help out your neighbors and help others. So just this last week, again, it was a little bit of a snowpocalypse here in Texas, our 1 week winter wonderland that it became. And we did the best that we could to help out our neighbors. We brought coffee over to one set of neighbors. The one morning when the electricity was off and we knew that they didn't get their cup of coffee in the morning, my next door neighbor, I heard him slipping and sliding and trying to get out of his driveway for a little while before it dawned on me that I should probably go out and give him a hand, because coming up from up north, you just think about things differently. And if somebody couldn't get out of their driveway, they weren't going to get out of their driveway. We're here, went out, gave him a push, and was able to push him out and got him out of his driveway within 5 minutes. I asked my wife to go over to my brand new neighbors that just moved here from California on the other side. She went over there, asked them if they needed anything, if we could be of any assistance, to not be afraid to ask. And again, brand new neighbors, just moved in less than a month ago. And they said no, but the same thing, if we can help you, let us know. And that later that night, got a knock on the door in the late evening, and she had baked up a loaf of fresh bread. Absolutely the most beautiful loaf of bread that you've ever seen. Looked like it should be on a magazine cover, and gave it to us and said, "Thank you so much for coming over and knocking on the door and asking if I needed help. If you guys need anything, please let me know, but just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate being in a neighborhood with people like that." So when you are in a position to help other people because you have bottles of water, look what that does. That's how community is built. So the other part of that is, for me, as far as preparedness, and this goes especially for those, well, it doesn't go especially for anybody. This goes for everybody. Whether you live in a rural area and you think that you're going to tough it out on your own, obviously you haven't been doing it long, and your mind will hopefully change as time goes on. Or whether you live in a neighborhood or in an apartment building, really this really goes for everybody. And it's this: relationships before transaction. We need to focus on building relationships and building rapport with those people that are around us. To me, this is almost a bigger part of preparedness than buying beans and buying Band-Aids, right? This is important. This is human. This is what makes us human. And this is coming from an introvert. This is coming from a guy who absolutely hates making phone calls, who absolutely hates having conversations, who having long conversations in business settings just wears me out. But I've come to the realization through years of reading and through years of speaking to people and through years of listening to people how necessary it is for us as human beings to have social contact. And we live in an area now, in a time, in a day and age where people's doors are closed. We talk to people that we know and that we love on a computer screen or on a telephone or via text and hieroglyphics or emojis or whatever they call them these days, right? Same idea, same thing that they were doing hundreds and thousands of years ago before an alphabet was invented, and now we've come all the way back to doing the same thing. So it seems to me, in certain ways of communicating and managing ourselves socially as people, we are regressing. And if we want to be prepared, if we want to be preparedness-minded, then part of our preparation should really be knowing our neighbors. Does that mean that you need to invite them over for barbecues or that you need to spend a great amount of time with them? No. But at the very least, when there is an emergency, you should be there to ask if you can help. And before there's an emergency, you should know their names. You should introduce yourself. You should be able to wave at them. Not hide as you sneak around your vehicle to make sure that you get into your house without them seeing you because they might want to come over and talk to you. You never know when somebody that you least expect is going to be the one that helps you out of a rough time. Those relationships are important. The reason why I pulled back my thoughts on rural areas is when we lived in a rural area there for 4.5 years, we were very dependent on the people around us. Much more so than I would really like to admit. We had people come, a neighbor across the road would come and he'd plow out our driveway. If I didn't have a neighbor to plow out my driveway, there were a lot of times I don't know that I would have been able to get out of my driveway. There were times when trees fell down and people came and hauled away the branches. There were times when people came and did other things that helped us out, helped us move firewood from one area to another area on our property. Never were asked to, but saw somebody in need. And not only did they see somebody in need, they realized what I'm talking about here, that at some point they may be the ones in need. So one cool thing that we actually did while we were there as part of building rapport, and I honestly didn't even think about this till now, was at Christmas time, my kids would bake cookies and my kids would make Christmas cards. And there were a few neighbors, ones that had helped us out regularly and had stopped by regularly, and we would go to their house and I'd pull around and I'd let my kids get out and they'd take their little plate of cookies and they would take their Christmas cards and they'd go knock on the door and they would give that as a gift, as a thank you, as a rapport building exercise, right, to those neighbors for Christmas. And there were 3 specific people that each year then, while we were there, we would stop. And it would make those neighbors' day, because when you're in a rural area, not a lot of people are stopping by, so it would make their day to see these 2 little kids come run up and knock on the door and give them a plate of cookies. And I'd be sitting there in the toasty Jeep, and they would wave, and I'd wave back at them. And we built community. We built rapport. We built friendship that way. And again, it's changing the mindset of what preparedness is, of just sitting in your house, clicking buy on Amazon, to looking at a bigger, bolder, more expansive view of what it means to prepare yourself for tomorrow. In those relationships and what you can do for others and what they may end up doing in return to you is oftentimes invaluable. I was out of town a few months back, and the Jeep broke down, and my wife was in it with my 2 kids, and the serpentine belt snapped and broke, and she was able to safely pull off to the side. But I was out of town. She had one of the neighbors down the road here. She was able to call them up, and they said, sure, absolutely, no problem. We are on our way to go pick you up. And they picked her and my 2 kids up and brought them safely home. Preparedness is not just your collection of things in your attic, in your garage, in your basement, or in your closet. It is bigger than that. It is expansive. We need to look at the bigger, broader picture of what it means to prepare for tomorrow. There are a lot of guys that listen to this podcast that expect the next 5 or 10 years to be far more difficult than the last 5 or 10 years. What are you doing to put your family and yourself in a position to thrive during that time? What are you doing today? Getting to know your neighbors or spending time with people in your community may be the best bang for the buck that there is. So I said that we were going to get into the why. I hope that you see the picture that I'm trying to paint here. The broad picture, the big picture that I'm trying to paint of preparedness. You know, our forefathers, all of your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your great-great-great-grandfather, all the way back in your lineage of men, of patriarchy in your past, prepared. If they did not, you would not be here today listening to this podcast. In the days of old, in the days that are long past, at least for now, if you did not prepare, you were not going to survive through the winter. You know, you think about it's very interesting when they celebrated Thanksgiving. They didn't celebrate Thanksgiving after winter. They celebrated Thanksgiving as a time of festivities and festival and feast because they had stored up enough food for the winter, because they had succeeded in their preparation to survive the winter. They didn't wait to celebrate after the winter. They celebrated the fact that they had prepared, they had had a good crop, and they were ready to take on the challenge of winter. And for generations and generations, that was the battle year after year, was to prepare yourself to take on whatever difficulties were going to come your way. And one of the big difficulties was each year was winter, was times of famine, was pestilence and war. All of these things need to be prepared for. So now for those that are looking to start out in preparedness, you may have a few obstacles, right? Maybe you're listening to this podcast, maybe some of the things that happened down here in Texas, or maybe recently where you live, because it's not just was Texas that had the snowpocalypse. There were a lot of southern states where it got colder than they had experienced or had experienced for a long time. Somebody was telling me of some really cool videos that they had seen of crocodiles sticking their snouts up out of the water so when the water would freeze, they could still breathe. I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't get a chance to see the videos myself. And maybe that would be a perfect idea for a podcast on adapting, right? But the idea is things are going to come your way that you suspect, and things are going to come your way that you don't expect. So maybe you're just opening your eyes to this idea that, man, if I had just had 4 cases of water in my garage, that would have completely changed everything. Maybe you're thinking, man, if I had just had a generator, that would have completely changed everything. My daughter would have been able to watch Dora the Explorer, and she would have been happy as can be, and I could have gone about doing whatever I needed to do, right? Just those simple ways of looking at things to simplify things. If we had had more food in the freezer, or if we had had a little bit more of this, or if we had had a couple more wool blankets, we would have been set, right? Or if I had had a battery-operated lantern, boy, that would have made the evening so much easier. But what's beautiful and what I think is so great about when you dig deep into preparedness this way, what I'm talking about, is that you can cater it to you and your needs, right? If you got little kids, you want to make sure that you have extra diapers and extra wipes, right? Nobody wants to be in the middle of a winter snowstorm and run out of diapers. I mean, some people are out of water and some people are out of diapers. When you're stuck in that position, you probably wouldn't even know which was worse, right? At least you could boil some snow so you had something to drink. At that point, when you got a little toddler and you got no diapers, you're in a tough spot. So what the beauty of this is you can cater this to you. So you're probably, if you're that guy, you're just thinking, man, this is something that I need to do. I want to take this responsibility. I understand that this is my mission, and I'm going to, as we say in the intro, I'm going to own it. I'm going to do this. You're going to run into a couple of obstacles, probably pretty quick. Number one obstacle you're going to run into is money. Unless you have an unlimited budget, when you start thinking about all the things that you could need and all the things you want, and if you start going on YouTube and seeing this list and going on this website and seeing that list, you could run out of money very, very, very quickly. So that's one obstacle. The other obstacle you might run into is a spouse. Your wife might say, no way. We are not going to be like those goofballs on reality TV. I refuse to even think about doing something like that, right? That's another obstacle. You might have an obstacle of space. You might live in an apartment or a very small condo, and space might be your biggest obstacle. But I guarantee you, as you want to get started here, you are going to run into an obstacle. And at that point, when you run into that obstacle, you have a choice to make. Either you're going to find a way through that obstacle because you feel that this is your mission and you're going to own it, or you're going to let that obstacle stop you and you're going to use it as an excuse, and you are not going to continue propelling yourself forward in what you feel you need to do. That's where the problem lies. That's where the problem lies. I'm not telling you what you need to do to prepare. I'm not telling you what you need to buy to prepare. I'm not telling you, here's your perfect plan, get this stuff. What I am going to tell you is that you need to do something. What that something is going to have to be up to you. But you are going to inevitably find some sort of obstacle as you try to get started in this, and you are going to have to overcome that obstacle. Now, money, my advice about in that area is start out slow. Make a deliberate plan that's catered to you, your wife, your situation, your children, the way you live your life, where you live, your location, the temperatures where you live. That should be specific to you and yours. Now, are there a few certain areas that we need to focus on to begin with? Yes. But a plan is important for a few reasons. The plan is important because it will save you from spending money on stupid things. The plan will help you sell this idea to your spouse if that's what needs to happen. A plan will help you stay on track when other things pop up or other YouTube video or advertisement on some website pops up telling you what the next thing you need to buy is. So a plan is a good way to work through both the money issue and the spouse issue. If you can present a plan to your wife, and this is why those that are good at selling things say that everybody needs to know how to sell. Selling things is not just for salespeople. We all need to have the ability to sell our ideas, to sell people on why we think that they need to do this, or why we should go here, or why we need to invest in this area, right? So my suggestion with a spouse is to go about it in a way, make your plan, and go about it in a way to sell them on the idea. And with what has happened recently in some areas, and with different emergencies or tornadoes or snowstorms or blizzards or these things, it should not be a very difficult sell. What happened with COVID and running out of toilet paper and things like that, don't let them forget that. And sell them on a plan to set yourself up to where you're not going to run out of toilet paper. To set yourself up with a plan where you are going to have enough water. Set yourself up with a plan where you do have some extra food around. You know, one way that I was able to get my wife more to understand what was going on and the importance of it was really the winters. And the understanding of, look, there may be times where we cannot go to the store. If a blizzard comes through here or even a tornado comes through here during the summer and blows down a tree. But for me, the winter, because it was cold and it was harsh up north, and there were times where our road was blocked off and we couldn't get through because of the snow, it made it a very easy sell. And we had started preparing before that, but all these little things helped propel her to now she's at the point where she's 100% on board. She understands. It makes sense to her. But not only does it make sense to her, it makes sense to my children as well. Why? Because we have a plan. And the reality is, when you're trying to sell this, when you're first trying to get people to understand why you're concerned about this, and you're going to be excited about it, you're going to be full of momentum to do something because you feel your need to be prepared, to protect, to take care of your family through hardships that might be coming your way, right? So you're fully motivated, you're running and gunning, you want to get this stuff taken care of. You want to protect your family. And that's good. Use that as motivation to write up a plan, write up an idea, and begin to sell your family and your wife on the need for the basics, to start out with the basics. We'll get into that in a second here as I'm running out of time. For people that don't have space, that's a tough one. But there are ways where you can store stuff in smaller containers under your bed or up on shelves, maybe in your closet. You're going to have to get pretty creative in order to store up the water and the food maybe that you want if you are in a very small location. Some condos, some places, maybe you can rent a garage, maybe you can rent a storage unit, but that, again, has its own difficulties. If it's snowstorms and you need stuff to get to a storage unit, maybe you have some neighbors who don't live too far away or that live in the same place that are preparedness-minded as well, that maybe have an extra bedroom or something. But you're going to need to get creative in order to solve that problem. So what do I consider the basics? I consider the basics having food for you and your family and your pets. Don't forget your pets for at least a week. Preferably 2 weeks, even just to start out. The goal to start out should be 2 weeks of food. Start with one, boom, ramp that up as soon as possible to 2 weeks of extra food around the house. And that can be a mix of whatever you like. A lot of people recommend just buying extra of what you normally eat. And for emergency food, for a couple weeks of food, that's probably a great idea. But you could combine in MREs or Mountain House dehydrated foods or beans and rice or canned foods and fruits and vegetables and things like that you can mix in as well, because a lot of that stuff is very cheap. It's very easy to add up a collection of that stuff. But really, we're shooting for a minimum of 2 weeks worth of food. Water, the same. You can always, at some point you're probably going to want to buy some baby wipes or something like that. At least you can kind of clean yourself up a little bit with those. If there is no water over a longer duration, you can always buy 5-gallon water containers and just fill them up in your bathtub to store, along with having bottled water that's a little bit easier to drink. So water is another big one. And again, we have that running out of our tap here. You can buy plastic containers for pretty cheap in order to fill up with water for storage. As long as it's sealed, water's not going to get old. Thirdly is shelter. Now, if you're in your home, you have your main shelter, right? That's really where you're going to want to stick most things out. If your home is damaged in a bad storm, obviously you're going to have to bug out. So maybe your vehicle turns into your shelter, or maybe a hotel room will end up being your shelter during the duration. And a hotel room can be a really uncomfortable spot to live too if it's a very high stress situation and you had food and water someplace and weren't able to transport it to that hotel. It can be rough to live in a hotel. That's no walk on easy street, right? Always, if you have what we want. If you have your druthers, we want to stay put in our house. So your home is your shelter. But what do we need in our shelter? Really, when we talk about shelter, we can shelter in a tent, we could shelter in a hammock, we could just shelter outside under a tarp, we could shelter inside of our vehicle, we could shelter underneath a trailer, we could shelter in a hotel, we could shelter anywhere. Really, what we're talking about when we're talking about shelter is we need warmth, right? We don't want to freeze. And hypothermia is nasty, and it doesn't have to be that cold if you're wet or damp to really get miserable and be in a very dangerous situation real quick. So shelter really mostly has to do with warmth and keeping dry. So blankets for me are huge. Wool blankets emergency wool blankets are relatively cheap for a lot of them if you buy them in bulk. The Mylar blankets are great just for an emergency situation. They're not going to last long, but if you are in a situation where you're wet and the temperatures are dropping and you need something to help you keep your body heat up, definitely they're going to help. But if you could throw a Mylar on and then throw a comforter or an extra blanket on, I mean, I have not been to Goodwill recently and priced out how much a used comforter is or a used Afghan or blanket at Goodwill, but I would imagine it's relatively cheap to be able to stock up on extra blankets that you can shove in a closet or under your beds to use should you be in a situation where you need to be able to keep warm, like so many people down here in Texas last week needed to do. And fourth on my list would be first aid. You can get very, very comprehensive, and there might be some nurses or some people that are very into first aid and that listen to this podcast, and their med kit may be huge. And there are others who have a little plastic container with some aspirin and some Band-Aids in it. You need to figure out, again, where your budget is, what works best for you. But don't forget, as you're building out your med kit with your Israeli bandages and your Salox and your all your gear, right? You're building it out with all this stuff. Don't forget the stuff for your kids. Don't forget children's aspirin. You know, during stressful situations, things aren't going the way that they normally are. A lot of times, you're going to get tension headaches. Make sure that you have something for them. Make sure that you have maybe some cough medicines, or make sure that you have something for infections, right? For cleaning out cuts and scraped knees and stuff. If you're in an emergency situation and a tornado or a thunderstorm or something like that comes through, scraped knees and cuts and abrasions, they're going to be part of the game, right? So make sure you have some stuff. And I'm going to finish off with this. As my children have grown older now, and preparedness and this mindset has really been a part of them growing up. From being on the homestead and being as self-sufficient as we could be at that time, to going through periods of time out there at the homestead where we were without electricity for 3 or 4 days at a time, and surviving through that and having what we needed to do for that. And then more recently with the COVID stuff and having what we needed to survive and get through that. And now with this winter thing, what my kids have been able to remain calm because they trust in me and they trust the plan. These are things that we talk about regularly. Just this last weekend, we had family meeting on Sunday. We have family meeting / Bible study on Sunday mornings. And my question was for them, and my homework for them for the week was, give me 3 things next Sunday, 3 things that we did right over this last week with the Texas snowpocalypse. What's 3 things that we had or that we did that benefited us, that made the situation work in our favor? And what are 3 things that we could have had or should have had or possibly would have made things easier for us or better for us? So give those assignments out. Talk about things. If there's one way to fight fear, which is really the opposite of what we want with preparedness, we do not want that fear. We do not want our kids. We do not want our wife. We do not want that fear in ourselves. Fear leads to being easily manipulated and to making bad decisions. In an emergency situation, we do not want those 2 things. So we want to fight fear. My kids and my wife have confidence in preparedness. They have confidence in the plan. They have confidence because they have now seen how this works. They have seen how it works to have food when the grocery stores were empty. They have seen what it's like to have a generator so that they could have some of their creature comforts during a power outage. They have seen why it's nice to have a lantern so that we could play in board games, so that we could play games to help calm people and help give people something to do when all the TV and electronics and all the things that we normally would do were gone. So on top of building preparedness, this is also a big part of leadership where we're working together in preparedness now. It's no longer just my responsibility. We work together through this. Everybody plays their own role. Everybody has the opportunity to share their ideas, to share their thoughts, but now they can 100% buy into it because they have seen it work. And when you see it work and see that you're able to make it through circumstances that are difficult, like I told my kids when we were talking this last Sunday, I said, I kind of feel like we cheated when I look at how we made it through this last week versus how other people made it through this last week. It was pretty easy for us. We're used to the cold winter still. That wasn't a big deal. We lived in a very cold house when we lived up north. So even having the electricity off, the house was still in the 50s. We had plenty of blankets. Driving in the ice is not that big of a deal. It's something that I've done hundreds and hundreds of times before. So I felt like we had kind of cheated our way through. We didn't suffer. We didn't have the difficulty. We didn't have the fear. We didn't have the worry. We didn't have all this that so many of our neighbors did. And when I said that to my son, he said, Dad, we didn't cheat. We prepared. And that is what I'm talking about. Getting not only yourself to understand the mindset of what preparedness really should be, but the end game is to get your family to buy into it as well. That is when you become powerful. That is when you build a real team around what you're doing. It's when you buy buy-in. It gives you the opportunity to prove yourself, but also gives them the opportunity to see why they should trust you, why we're doing what we're doing, why we have what we have. So I'll let the podcast go at that. I don't know if it'll be next week or not. Probably this next week I will get into another episode on this. I want to branch this out even bigger as we talk about homesteading and how that fits into preparedness. I want to talk about my experience with homesteading and how it fits in, our future going into the new homestead and how it fits into this idea, this overarching idea of preparedness in this whole overarching mindset. It's not a closet, right? It's not a closet full of stuff. It's a big, big picture. It's a way of life. It's a mindset. So we'll get into that a little bit. I want to also get into my newest venture into preparedness, which really is the Overland project, the PDL Overland, Budget Overland project. I want to prove that overlanding is not just for people with an extra $100,000 to spend on a vehicle and all the cool gear to trick it out. I want to show people that for $10,000, we can buy a vehicle that really anybody can find anywhere if they look. Buy a vehicle and set it up in a way that you can haul the food and your family and what you need, the gear that you need for 7 days should you need to go on a trip or go on vacation, or if you need to scoot out of your house for 7 days. That's the goal with the project. It's maybe a little ambitious once you start pricing things out, but I think I can make it happen. And I think we can turn that into quite the awesome vehicle without breaking the bank in order to prove that theory. But I want to get more into what that's about. And then we'll get a little bit more into EDC and an EDC bag or emergency bug out type bag. I want to go into that stuff a little bit as well, just to broaden this picture, just to broaden this idea of preparedness as a way of life. And for the opposite reason that so many people would sell it that way, it's not about fear. It's about facing the fears. I did have one more thing in my notes here that I wanted to share for people that are getting started. I just noticed, and I'll try to wrap this thing up. If you're getting started, number one is you need to be very, very honest with yourself. And really, this is not for... I wish somebody had told me this when I was a year in or 2 years in or 3 years into getting prepared. Really, number one thing is to be very honest with yourself and where you're at. And this is kind of scary when you first start out, because you start to realize how difficult of a position you would be in should any little emergency arise, right? But the more honest with yourself you are, the more it will help you as you move on to coming up with a plan. You see, for me, I've never had done a plan. I had never really focused on, hey, let's be honest with myself and I'm going to build a plan off of this. I wish that I had done that a long time ago. But if you're honest with yourself and where you're at and what you need and the region that you live in and the age of your kids, if you have kids or if you have a spouse or maybe you live with your parents and you know that that would be your responsibility, be honest. Then come up with a real plan. Take your time. Pick away at that plan if there's things that you need to buy. Pick away at that plan if there's things that you feel like you need to learn. Because there's a lot of... You can put yourself in a much better position to thrive versus survive with knowledge. And those can be soft skills, interpersonal skills, like we were talking about getting to know your neighbors, building relationships with your neighbors. Or those can be hard skills, like starting fires or purifying water or driving in the snow, right? And first off, to start out, focus on the basics and then build out from there. So those are kind of my tips for getting started. Again, if you're interested in this, if this is something you're just starting out in and you would like to contribute, you can always direct message me on Instagram. You can always hit me up on YouTube or on Facebook. let me know if there's something that I totally missed or started to talk about and then drifted away from, and you need more information, or you want to have a little bit more insight into what it is that I'm talking about here. Give me a direct message, and I will do my best to answer that in the next podcast as we dig just a little bit deeper and broaden this idea even just a little bit more. If you want to be a bigger part of what I want to build here, I want to build a group of men that understand what it means to prepare, to defend, and to lead. I want to build a group of men here that don't want to just talk about this stuff, but want to live it out. I want to build a group of men here that seek one another out, that know one another, that are there for one another, that support one another in their growth and in their learning. This is not some place for people that know everything. Because as I talked about in that podcast not long ago, the reality is the more that you actually know, the less that you think you know. Because everything is bigger than we realize until we really dig into it. So if you would like to be a bigger part of PDL, what I'm building here, what I'm growing here, and the group of guys that are getting behind this, if you'd like to be a bigger part of that, you can go to Prepare.Defend.Lead.com, and you can purchase some swag on there that helps pay for the podcast and the website and all the crazy stuff that's coming out of my pocket right now. You can follow me on Instagram at Prepare.Defend.Lead. I post on there daily different things that are going on with family, with the homestead that's coming up, with the old homestead, and with the PDL Budget Overland Project. And you can follow me on Facebook. I also started a thing on Minds. You can follow me there as well, minds.com. On Instagram, I do a daily show that's just off the cuff, unfiltered, unscripted, and unedited. Just sit down and share. It's either between 2 and 5 minutes, either something that I'm learned that day, something that I've been thinking about, or something that I did that day, just totally off the cuff, as if you were sitting in the car seat next to me as I record it in the Montero overland vehicle. So as we move forward here, as the momentum continues to grow with this podcast, I would appreciate your guys' help in spreading the word. Please review this podcast wherever you download it. That makes a big difference and helps move things forward. Share this podcast and subscribe. If you could do those 3 things, that would be a tremendous help. I know that you're busy. I know that you got a lot going on. I know you're probably listening to this podcast that went way too long on your commute home or on your commute to work, and the last thing on your mind really is doing something like writing a review for a podcast or telling somebody else about this podcast. But for me, I would really appreciate it. There are a lot of men who don't know about this podcast, obviously. If I look at my numbers, it's very, very small compared to the population here, even this country. But how much different would our world be if your neighbors were prepared as you are, and your neighbor's neighbor were as prepared as you are, and the people that go to your church were as prepared as you want to be, and the people in your group or in your community were as prepared-minded as you are or as you're becoming? How much different would everything be? How much less control would people have over you? And how much more freedom would you actually have? So with that, as always, hold fast and God bless.